listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Welcome back to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and you know what time it is. It's a Friday that we're recording this, but this will be airing in 2 days. But like always, we want to bring amazing content to the show. We have a special guest today, and we're joined by a true pioneer who's rewriting the rules of health, longevity, and human performance. Dr. Nathan S. Bryan is here with us today. He's a revolutionary scientist, biotech entrepreneur, and best-selling author whose groundbreaking nitric oxide research has shattered conventional wisdom and delivered real solutions to millions of people. Man, I have to catch my breath because this guy has so much going on. So I just want to call time out and say, first and foremost, I want to welcome Dr. Nathan S. Bryan to the show and say, man, I just have to bring you on because the show might be over by the time I do my intro.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a great honor.
Yes, sir. I appreciate being on. You have a lot of great work. You have more than 100 peer-reviewed publications. You have amazing things that I believe our audience is going to gain a lot of knowledge from. So kind of break down what you do for a living and what is your passion.
Well, today I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started out as a professor of molecular medicine, spent 20 years in academia, teaching in medical schools, doing research. But really, my research was focused on nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is this molecule that's naturally produced in the human body. It's produced in the lining of the blood vessels and regulates blood flow, circulation, oxygen delivery. It reduces inflammation. Everything we know about disease prevention, human optimization, and longevity is dependent upon the body's ability to produce sufficient amounts of nitric oxide. So that's been kind of my playground. And, interestingly, this molecule, when it's produced, it's a gas, and it's gone in less than a second. So my work has been really trying to figure out when nitric oxide is produced, where does it go, what does it become, and how does it signal? And then what leads to a loss of this production? And then once we realize that, then we can start to developing, rational therapies and product technology that could overcome the loss of nitric oxide production, actually restore and recapitulate its production and signaling. So that's my 30-year story in 30 seconds.
Millions of people unknowingly suffer from nitric oxide deficiency. What are some of the everyday warning signs that our listeners and viewers should recognize before, bigger issues take place?
Yeah, our body's always talking to us, and we got to listen to it. Or if we don't listen to it and ignore these signs and symptoms, then we get sick and, get end-stage disease and eventually die. But because there's not a blood lab, or an official diagnosis for nitric oxide deficiency that we can measure in blood or some urine or biomarkers, we have to rely on symptoms. And so today we recognize that the first sign and symptom of nitric oxide insufficiency is sexual dysfunction. And we think about it, this occurs in both men and women. If you can't dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs, then you don't get an erection. And it's just not in men, it occurs in women too. And that dilation comes from the production of nitric oxide. So if the blood vessels become damaged and dysfunctional, where they can no longer make nitric oxide, we develop sexual dysfunction. And number two, your blood pressure starts to go up, because nitric oxide is the main vasodilator. So if you're not making nitric oxide, you've got smaller blood vessels with the same volume of blood going through smaller pipes, so pressure goes up. And 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. And then the third is you start to develop metabolic disease and insulin resistance, because nitric oxide is required for insulin to do its job and to clear glucose from the circulation. And we know that 93% of Americans are metabolically unfit. And then 4, you start to develop exercise intolerance. If you get short of breath going up a flight of steps, or if you can't, do moderate physical exercise for 20 or 30 minutes, you get chest tightness, the chest pain, short of breath, and that tells us your body's not making nitric oxide. And then 5thly, you start to develop mild cognitive impairment, brain fog, dementia, and eventually Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is kind of the end stage of chronic nitric oxide deficiencies.
Once again, let's on Refocus Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today. Go to his website, is drnathансbryan.com. My next question for you is, we live in a world of supplements. It's a lot for everything you can imagine. There's also some nitric oxide products that make bold claims. With your expertise and your experience, what are some of the biggest myths out there that you like to bust for our viewers and our listeners?
Well, first, let me say, I think supplements can be important. If you're deficient in certain nutrients like magnesium or iodine or vitamin D, then these supplements are important because they replace missing nutrients. And so they're meant to supplement what's missing. But honestly, the nitric oxide dietary supplements in the market are basically useless. A lot of them contain arginine or citrulline, and we're never deficient in these amino acids, so it makes no sense to supplement them. And then, one of the biggest myths out there today is beets. The beets are nitric oxide, and beets are, beetroot powder. You see them advertised on TV. You go to the pharmacy or health food store, and the shelves are lined with beet products. And I've tested all those beet products on the market, and none of them produce nitric oxide. Because this is a very complex science. You have to understand how the human body makes nitric oxide. And then if you don't understand that, then you can't understand what leads to a loss of its production. And if you don't understand that, then how can you develop supplements or products that address the root cause? And most of these companies are led by marketing executives. They have no scientists. They have no science. They're just throwing things in a capsule, throwing things in a bottle, and calling it nitric oxide. So buyer beware, because as I mentioned, nearly none of these products provide nitric oxide as they're advertised. And that's really one of my greatest frustrations being in the science for 30 years is, trying to maintain the integrity of the field and calling out these companies who, are certainly deceptive, and many of them are outright fraudulent in their marketing and advertising.
You've been on many, many platforms. I mean, I checked out your website and I Googled you, and with so much demand, with your presence, if I can say that, your expertise, I should say, what are some of the things that people come to you and ask questions about? Like, are there daily habits that I can do? Are there dietary shifts that I can generally boost nitric oxide levels? Is that possible? Or some solutions that you share with your people?
No, it is. I mean, my job when I was in academia was to understand the mechanism of disease to the extent that we could correct it. And so once we understand the cause of human disease, now we can start to implement diet and lifestyle strategies that can maintain normal biochemistry, normal physiological function, and really lead a long, healthy life free of disease. And that's the goal. And you can do this without medicine. So I'll tell you, in terms of nitric oxide, you got to do two things. You got to stop doing the things that we know disrupt its production. And then number two, you got to start doing the things that's known to activate and stimulate its natural production. So number one, you got to eliminate sugar. Sugar's the enemy. It sticks to the enzyme, decreases nitric oxide production, changes the microbiome in your mouth. You got to stop using fluoride toothpaste. Fluoride is an antiseptic. It's a neurotoxin, and it kills all the bacteria in your mouth. And then antiseptic mouthwash. 2 out of 3 Americans use mouthwash every day, and 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. And we and others have discovered and published that if you use mouthwash, it kills the good bacteria, decreases nitric oxide production, and your blood pressure goes up. And then the other big thing, the fourth thing, is antacids, the proton pump inhibitors. Those are really contributing to a complete loss of nitric oxide production. We're seeing about a 40% increase in heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's in patients who have been on proton pump inhibitors for at least 3 years. So when I tell people, if you stop using fluoride, get rid of mouthwash, stop eating sugar or simple carbohydrates or anything that increases blood sugar, and then wean off antacids, now you've released the brakes on the body's ability to make nitric oxide. And now if we add some exercise, 20, 30 minutes of exercise a day, 20, 30 minutes of sunlight, nasal breathing, deep breathing exercises, and then we have product technology that does it for you. But that's really the simple solution to disease prevention, is maintaining optimal nitric oxide production, alleviating the inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction we see in chronic disease. And nitric oxide does all of that.
There's some good information. I have to watch just myself just to get reviewed. That's some really great stuff you're sharing with us. I appreciate that. You also have a book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life. What are some of the complex research that you had to go through to write this book, and how do you make it to where the average reader can understand where you're coming from?
Well, that's been the challenge. I mean, obviously, I've published, as you mentioned, over 100 peer-reviewed scientific papers for the scientific community and physicians to read, but this is a technical read. It's complex science. So my objective in the book was twofold. Number one, take that complex science of nitric oxide and distill it down into something that a normal layperson, kind of a sixth grade reading level, could understand. Understand the importance of nitric oxide, understand what it is, what it does, and why everybody on the earth should be concerned about its production. And then two, to kind of tell my personal story of where I came from, the discoveries we've made in my lab, and then kind of the hurdles and obstacles that have been put up, in the meantime. So it's meant to be, inspirational and motivational, because if you're doing things that matter and that are somewhat life-changing, then you become a target and people come after you. So, I tell people all the time, don't get discouraged when, people come after you and you become a target and they tell you what you're trying to do is impossible. It means you're on the brink of a breakthrough and that what you're doing is meaningful. Because if you're doing stuff that doesn't matter, people leave you alone. But when you start doing things that's disruptive and has the potential to change the world and change certainly the landscape of medicine and healthcare, then you become a target. And you have to overcome a lot of these obstacles, the violent opposition, the ridicule, and just, keep your head down and the truth will reveal itself. And, as you said, the truth is on our side.
And speaking of being a target, take us back when you decided it was time to leave your academic career in big pharma and build your own health solutions, your own brand. What was that moment like, making that pivot? And what was your experience along that journey?
Well, it was a leap of faith. It was quite scary, to be honest with you, because I had a very comfortable job. I had a great job. I was building a lot of peer esteem. I'd received a number of awards and had several dozen issued patents. But what I realized was that no one was moving the technology forward. Typically in academia, you make discoveries, you submit it to the Office of Technology Management, and they'll find an existing company to license your technology through, to see it through clinical trials and to get it to market. But there was no one interested in nitric oxide. This was more than 22 years ago. And so I quickly realized that if it's to be, it's up to me. So I have to see this through. It's not just enough to make the discoveries, because discoveries are only important if you bring it to market as a product or technology, medical device, or new diagnostics. So I realized no one was doing this, so I had to do it. So I left academia. I started my first company in 2009. Then I had to go out and conceptualize and productize my discoveries. So you had to find manufacturers. You had to go around and find somebody who believed in what you were doing, they could actually believe in it and create a solid dose form of nitric oxide gas, which everybody told me was impossible. It couldn't be done. And so we solved that riddle, and then, we've been going strong ever since. And, we've got a portfolio of companies now worth well over $1 billion. And, it's the most successful technology in the history of the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston. So we've been very successful, but I can tell you it was very scary leaving a good paying job and, venturing out into entrepreneurship where there's a lot of unknowns. But I knew deep down that what we had done was going to be life-changing. The discoveries were important. In fact, too important not to see it through. So it's, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of discipline. But, looking back, I wouldn't change anything. It was the right move. And, it hasn't been easy. But I think, it's starting to pay dividends now.
Once again, listen on Refocus Radio, watching us online, talking to our guest today, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. Go to his website. It's that easy, drnathansbryan.com. When you think about the process of overcoming the adversity, it comes to everybody. Life throws curveballs. It doesn't pick and choose. It's just coming. If it hasn't come today, it's coming tomorrow. That's right. As you keep building what you're doing, not only giving solutions to your clients, but you're also navigating economic storms and unforeseen setbacks. How do you keep you and your team motivated when times are not always clear?
Well, the success of any company is based on its people. So we're very deliberate in who we bring into the company. And fortunate for us, very few people have an opportunity to wake up every morning and the work that they do changes people's lives. Because we wake up every morning and we have hundreds of emails, phone calls, voicemails, texts of people who have tried our product technology, taken the advice and made these very simple lifestyle changes, and it changed their life. It saved their lives in many cases, but certainly changed their life, changed the trajectory of their health. So when times get tough, we believe in what we're doing because we see the results. And so, we try to maintain a very nimble team with low overhead. That way we can survive the downs and the ups and downs of any macro, economic changes, things that we can't control in the global economy. But we know what we're doing is the right thing. And, we just focus on doing the right things. And when you do the right thing, the cash register rings. But we don't wake up every morning and try to ring the cash register. We don't try to sell products. We try to go out and educate and inform people and give them, scientific-based solutions and, bring to the fore this knowledge that, may be missing in their medical journey. And people, certainly in America, people are grossly mismanaged. Because you wake up, you're 40, 50 years old, you're on 10, 12, 15 different medications, and people are sick and tired of being sick and tired, and doctors and medicines aren't making them better. And so they're looking for solutions, science-based solutions. And so we try to provide, a trustworthy source based on real science of kind of some, what we think are common sense approaches to health and longevity. But that's really our secret, and we want people to trust us. We're not out there trying to take your money. We're out there trying to advance the science and bring awareness around what we think is a foundational and maybe one of the most important molecules in the human body.
When you look at the future, you and your team are developing next generational therapies as well. What breakthroughs do you see on the horizon that could change how we treat heart disease or chronic wounds?
Well, cardiovascular disease has been the number one killer for men and women worldwide for over 100 years. And to me, it's unacceptable. Because we've spent billions and billions of dollars on trying to understand cardiovascular disease, and yet today it still remains the number one killer. And we know, without a doubt, indisputable, that the cardiovascular disease is caused from a lack of nitric oxide production. So what we're doing in our drug studies is we're developing a drug for cardiovascular disease and ischemic heart disease. And we're finding that if we give nitric oxide, which restores nitric oxide production, dilates the blood vessels, we can overcome ischemic heart disease. We can reverse cardiovascular disease. We see plaque regression by as much as 11% in 6 months. So I think once we start to get our drugs approved through the FDA and on a global market, I think cardiovascular disease will no longer be the number one killer of men and women worldwide. And that's my goal. And then we've got, Alzheimer's, which is growing in numbers by leaps and bounds. And again, despite billions and billions of dollars in research and development, there's no effective Alzheimer's drug out there. And as I mentioned, Alzheimer's is an end stage of chronic nitric oxide deficiency. So we're developing a nitric oxide drug for Alzheimer's, which the early data are telling us that it will completely eradicate Alzheimer's. Because Alzheimer's is a vascular metabolic disease, and nitric oxide addresses the vascular metabolic phenotypes of Alzheimer's. And then we were making a topical drug for diabetic ulcers and non-healing wounds. And, in the U.S. alone, 65,000 Americans die in nursing homes every year from wounds that get infected because they're non-healing. They develop sepsis, and they die from it. And again, to me, that's unacceptable because nitric oxide, we have not seen a wound that nitric oxide would not heal. Because it kills the infection in the wound, it gets blood supply to the wound, activates an immune response, mobilizes stem cells, and you basically enable the natural wound healing response simply by our nitric oxide technology. So the future for me is very bright. We're going to address a lot of these poorly managed, mismanaged chronic diseases over the next, I think, certainly before the next decade. And, it's going to change the world. It's certainly going to change the landscape of medicine.
In the science of longevity, what does nitric oxide fit into that real equation, extending one person's lifespan, not just in quality years, but in high performance years?
To me, there's three primary kind of clinically relevant objective endpoints. It's the length of our telomeres. So the telomeres are the ends of our chromosomes. That when we get, with each cell replication, the telomeres can become shorter. And it's clear now that the shorter your telomeres, the shorter your lifespan. And then the other major one is the function of our mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles of the cell. And then the third is the ability to mobilize our own stem cells to repair and replace dysfunctional cells. So if we can maintain the telomere length, if we can maintain an adequate mitochondrial number in the cell and the function of the mitochondria, and we can improve the number of stem cells in circulation to repair and replace dysfunctional cells, we can extend life by all measures. And not coincidentally, nitric oxide is what prevents telomeres from shortening. It induces mitochondrial biogenesis and improves the efficiency of oxygen consumption and energy production in the cell. And then nitric oxide is the signal that tells our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate. So if our body loses the ability to produce nitric oxide, what happens? We have shorter telomeres, we have mitochondrial dysfunction, and we don't mobilize our own stem cells. So we have these zombie cells, these senescent cells. They can't do their job. We have low energy production, and we die at a young age with chronic disease. And we know mechanistically exactly how to overcome that. And it all boils down to an adequate production of nitric oxide.
Once again, listen to Refocus Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. Go to his website, super easy, drnathansbryan.com. I know we're getting short in time, but I have another question for you when it comes to fatigue. That is something that ever since the pandemic, we've been hearing about people being a little bit more tired, brain fog. Specifically, when you think about fatigue, when our viewers, our listeners, they feel like there's something off in their body where they just feel like they're not getting well rested all the time. They're feeling tired, overwhelmed with being tired. What can you help us understand more with nitric oxide when it comes to changing the way they're feeling and helping them to refocus their health?
Well, for me, it's all about blood flow and circulation. If you have poor blood flow and circulation, you're not going to deliver oxygen to individual cells of the body. Without oxygen, that cell can't respire and can't make cellular energy. And kind of in the human sense, we call that fatigue or chronic fatigue syndrome. But at the cellular and subcellular level, we know it's all about the adequate delivery of oxygen and the conversion of that oxygen into cellular energy by the mitochondria. So if we don't make nitric oxide, we have decreased mitochondrial function, we have less oxygen delivery, we have poor circulation, and the cells can't do their job. So if we can improve nitric oxide production through the things we talked about earlier, we improve oxygen delivery, we improve the conversion of oxygen to cellular energy, we're mobilizing stem cells, we're repairing and replacing dysfunctional cells, and we have the energy and the oxygen and nutrients delivered to every cell in the body, so every cell performs optimally and the human performs optimally. So again, all these mechanisms are very well elucidated, and people are looking for caffeine and stimulants and energy drinks, and that's fake energy. What I encourage people to do is restore the natural energy through nitric oxide production, through a good diet, a balanced diet in moderation. We have to exercise. We have to breathe through our nose, not through our mouth. And these simple things, and another thing I highly recommend is an 18-hour daily fast. It completely resets your metabolism. So if you only eat between 12 noon and 6 p.m., then that completely changes. And the data on intermittent fasting and caloric restriction are undeniable. It's the most important thing you can do for longevity.
Once again, go to his website, drnathansbryan.com. As we are wrapping up this interview, if you had a few thoughts, people are thinking about summer, but we like to eat too. I mean, vacations come around. You're going to be going to hotels where, Las Vegas specifically, where there's going to be some good food to eat. What's some ways that we can be a little bit more conscious as we are on vacation and not go overboard?
Well, Americans are typically overfed, and so I would just encourage people to pay attention to what you put in your mouth. I mean, whole foods, good protein, good quality protein, good fat, limited carbs. What you do one day a week is going to kill you. It's what you do those other 6 days. And so, we have to enjoy life, and I'm not against, kind of rewarding ourselves but on days and, and maybe having a dessert or something just one day, but intermittent fasting, even if you eat, people think an 18-hour fast is difficult. It's really not that difficult, because if you eat your last meal at 6 p.m., and you really shouldn't eat 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed anyway, then you go to bed and wake up and sleep 8 hours. You're already 10, 12 hours into it. And then, if you wake up at 8, just fast for 4 more hours, drink your coffee, drink water, and don't eat till noon the next day. And what you'll find is those hunger pangs go away. You won't wake up hungry. You'll see the fat start to fall off. You'll see your body composition change. You'll feel better. You'll have more energy. But, just use common sense. And there is no excuse for not exercising, because we have to move. Humans are made to be mobile. And so wake up every morning, go do 20, 30 minutes of walking, brisk walking out in the sunlight. It's the best thing you can do, and practice nasal breathing.
Well, once again, been watching and listening to Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, Dr. Bryan, and he's on a mission to arm everyday people with the science they need to reclaim their vitality. Once again, go to his website. That website again is drnathansbryan.com. Like always, want to say to you, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.